Picture this. 50,000 warriors, trapped on all sides with no way out. Death wasn't just likely, it was a sure thing. The Mongol horde had them boxed in like cornered animals. Arrows poured down like rain, every escape cut off. It was over. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Then, out of nowhere, something impossible happened. The Mongol general in charge of the siege turned against his own army. And not just any general. This was one of Genghis Khan's most trusted men. A warlord who'd helped carve half of Asia into the Mongol Empire. A man who knew every tactic, every secret, every weakness of their unstoppable machine. With one decision, he didn't just save 50,000 men. He sealed his own fate. Because betraying Genghis Khan, that wasn't something you walked away from. Death wasn't the punishment. It was the mercy you prayed for. And here's the wild part. That general's name was Belgutai Noyan. Now, Belgutai wasn't some scheming traitor trying to grab the throne. No, he was Genghis Khan's and his sworn blood brother. Not related by birth, but bound by something far deeper in Mongol tradition. A sacred bond forged by choice, not blood. Belgutai wasn't just another warrior either. He'd personally executed more than 10,000 enemies in the Khan's name and captured 17 cities before turning 30. His battlefield genius was so legendary that some armies would surrender the moment they heard he was coming. And honestly, Belgutai loved that power. At his height, he commanded 80,000 of the fiercest Mongol warriors alive. More men than most European kingdoms could field at once. He owned 500 warhorses, had 12 wives, and his personal tent was so massive it took 200 men to set up. So you're probably wondering, why on earth would a man with that kind of power, wealth, and loyalty risk it all to betray the most dangerous leader in history? The answer lies in a secret so dark and so personal that historians tried to erase it from memory. But recently uncovered Mongolian records tell the real story, and it's far more twisted than anyone could have imagined. Because Belgutai didn't just know Genghis Khan's military strategies. He knew his private sins, the kind of secrets that could tear an empire apart. And when the Khan crossed a line that even the Mongols couldn't forgive, Belgutai was forced to make an impossible choice. Loyalty to his brother in blood, or loyalty to something far greater. This is the unbelievable true story of Belgutai Noyan, the only man who ever betrayed Genghis Khan, and somehow almost lived to tell the tale. The year was 1172. The Mongolian steppes were a brutal place. A land where the cold could freeze you solid, dropping below -40, and where war between tribes was as common as breathing. Kids learned to ride horses before they could walk. Belgutai was born into that chaos, the son of a minor tribal chief named Day Sechin. But when Belgutai was only 7, his story took a dark and violent turn. His father was poisoned during a feast hosted by a rival tribe, a classic steppe assassination. His mother, pregnant with another child, was taken captive and enslaved. Belgutai survived only because he was small enough to hide beneath the bodies of fallen horses during the raid. For 3 days, that little boy wandered the frozen plains alone. He drank horse blood to stay alive and moved only at night to avoid being seen. At 7 years old, he learned one brutal truth. Out here, cleverness could save you where strength couldn't. It wasn't luck that kept Belgutai alive. It was calculation. Even as a kid, he understood survival meant being useful to someone stronger. So when a young warrior named Temujin, the man who would one day become Genghis Khan, found him scavenging near a burned-out camp, Belgutai didn't beg for mercy. Instead, he made an offer. He told Temujin everything he knew, where the raiders were hiding, how many there were, what their habits were. This 7-year-old had been watching, memorizing, and plotting revenge. Temujin was so impressed that he didn't just spare the boy. He took a knife, cut his own hand, and performed the blood brother ceremony right there on the spot. They sliced their palms open, pressed the wounds together, and let their blood mix, sealing the bond that made them brothers in the truest Mongol sense. From that moment on, Belgutai and Temujin were closer than family. Years later, Belgutai would look back and say that was the day he learned the greatest truth of all. Knowledge was deadlier than any sword. By the time Belgutai hit 16, he'd already crafted what would become his signature approach to warfare. While most young Mongols earned respect by charging into combat or winning duels, Belgutai earned his by collecting information. He was fluent in 7 languages: Mongol, Chinese, Persian, Arabic, Turkic, Tangut, and Russian. But here's the clever part. He kept that talent hidden. During peace talks or interrogations, he'd sit quietly, pretending to rely on translators, when in reality he understood every single word. That trick made him priceless. He gathered secrets no one else could: which tribes were plotting uprisings, which merchants were sneaking weapons across borders, which enemy generals could be bought with gold. Piece by piece, he built a web of informants stretching from the Great Wall of China all the way to the deserts of Persia. He was just 19 years old, yet he knew more about the political heartbeat of Asia than men who'd spent their entire lives in war councils. When the Mongol tribes finally united in 1206, Belgutai stood at a crossroads. He could chase battlefield glory like the other generals, or he could build something far more lasting, a new kind of power based on intelligence, not brute force. Belgutai saw what others couldn't. He convinced the newly crowned Genghis Khan that fighting head-on was wasteful. Why lose thousands of good men, he argued, when you can crush your enemies through fear, confusion, and deception? It sounded simple, but the brilliance was in how carefully he laid the groundwork. His proposal changed history. He created what many now call the world's first organized military intelligence unit, and he, of course, was its commander. The first test came in 1209, during the invasion of the Xia kingdom. Most generals wanted a direct assault on the capital. Belgutai had other plans. His spies had discovered that the Xia king was extremely superstitious, so Belgutai decided to wage war inside the man's mind. His agents began spreading whispers of an ancient prophecy, a divine punishment descending from the north. Soon, dead birds marked with strange symbols started appearing around temples. Wells ran red with dye, making it look like the land itself was bleeding. Within a few short weeks, the entire city was paralyzed by fear. So when the Mongol army finally arrived, the defenders had already surrendered in spirit. Not a single Mongol life was lost that day. Genghis Khan was so impressed he handed Belgutai full control over all intelligence operations. But what no one realized then was that Belgutai's network didn't just watch the enemy. It was watching everyone. Every general, every minister, even members of the Khan's family were under his silent surveillance. You might wonder why he'd spy on his own people. The answer shows just how sharp Belgutai really was. He knew that in an empire built entirely on conquest, friends could turn into rivals overnight. Information wasn't just power, it was protection. It was leverage. By 1215, Belgutai had enough dirt to destroy half the Mongol leadership. He knew which generals were skimming gold from the war spoils, which administrators were selling supplies to the enemy, even which one of Genghis Khan's sons had certain compromising habits. Every secret was documented, verified, and hidden in secret caches that only Belgutai knew about. By 1219, Belgutai Noyan didn't command the biggest army. He commanded something far greater. He ruled over truth itself. Every report, every rumor, every piece of intelligence that reached Genghis Khan passed through Belgutai's hands first. Think about that. When the Khan asked, "How many enemies are we facing?" it was Belgutai who decided the answer. When generals claimed victories, Belgutai confirmed or denied them. When cities offered tribute, he was the one counting and recording it. He controlled what the most powerful man on earth believed to be real. And little by little, Belgutai was editing that reality, shaping the empire from behind the curtain. Let me give you a perfect example of just how deep Belgutai's manipulation ran. When the city of Otrar executed a group of Mongol merchants, the spark that ignited the war with the Khwarezm Empire, history books usually call it an unprovoked attack. But that's not the full story. Belgutai had known it was coming weeks before it happened. His network had already warned him of rising tensions, of whispers that violence was brewing. And yet, he did nothing. He let the storm break because he knew that when war came, his value to Genghis Khan would skyrocket. And he was right. The campaign that followed was Belgutai at his absolute peak. Brilliant, ruthless, and terrifying all at once. For 3 years, He had been quietly embedding his agents throughout the Khwarezm Empire. Not just spies, real insiders. The Shah's personal physician, Belgutai's man. Two of the Shah's own generals? Both blackmailed. Even the Shah's favorite concubine was secretly feeding information back to Belgutai's network. So when the Mongols invaded, the Shah's empire began to collapse from the inside out. His own people were tearing it apart. But what came after each victory reveals the real nature of Belgutai Noyan. The official Mongol records listed the treasure taken from each city: gold, silver, gems, livestock. But Belgutai's private ledgers, found long after his death, told another story. Millions in treasure simply vanished between the battlefield and the Khan's treasury. It wasn't just corruption. Belgutai had built an entire shadow economy. Yes, some of that money went to pay his informants or bribe foreign officials. But most of it went into something far more dangerous. He was building a power base of his own. By 1218, Belgutai commanded over 15,000 soldiers who were officially intelligence operatives. But in reality, they were his private army, men loyal only to him. He secretly owned property across dozens of cities, hidden behind false identities and fake records. Historians estimate that by modern standards, his fortune would have been worth over $100 million. Belgutai Noyan wasn't just serving the empire anymore. He was an empire, his own invisible one. But power does something to a man. It reveals the darkness that's been hiding inside all along. Somewhere along the way, Belgutai stopped seeing himself as a servant of Genghis Khan and started believing he was smarter than everyone else. And honestly, he probably was. But intelligence without restraint, that's a dangerous combination. He began taking reckless risks not because he needed to, but because he could. In war councils, he'd openly contradict other generals, knowing none of them dared speak out. He held every man's secrets in his hands. One word from him could destroy careers, reputations, lives. He started taking women from conquered cities who had already been promised to other commanders, daring anyone to challenge him. But the event that began his downfall seemed small at first. A Chinese merchant named Wei Chun was caught smuggling intelligence to the Song dynasty. By Mongol law, that was an instant death sentence. Yet Belgutai stepped in and spared him. His excuse? Wei Chun was too valuable as an informant. The truth was much simpler. Wei Chun was managing Belgutai's hidden fortune, laundering the wealth that funded his secret empire. At first, no one questioned it. Belgutai was too powerful, too respected. But whispers started spreading. How did he always have gold to bribe foreign leaders when even the royal treasury ran dry? Why did his so-called intelligence units resemble small private armies? And most suspicious of all, why did Genghis Khan's movements keep getting leaked, while Belgutai's were always perfectly hidden? The tension finally snapped in the winter of 1221. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. A Khwarezm princess named Gulnar had been captured during the campaign and was being held for ransom. She was placed under Genghis Khan's personal protection, which meant she was completely untouchable. Anyone who laid a hand on her faced execution by 1,000 cuts. But Gulnar made a fatal mistake. She recognized one of Belgutai's spies, a man who had once served in her father's court, and she threatened to expose him. What happened next depends on which version you believe. The official Mongol records claim Gulnar took her own life that night. But 3 witnesses later swore they saw Belgutai leaving her tent, and when her body was found, she was pregnant. The implications were catastrophic. Because if Belgutai had truly violated a woman under Genghis Khan's protection, it wasn't just a crime, it was treason. It was treason not just against a man, but against the entire order of the Mongol world. Then, in March of 1222, everything came crashing down, and in a way no one could have predicted. A dying Khwarezm general named Jalal ad-Din, desperate to save his son's life, revealed something that shattered the Mongol leadership to its core. He claimed to possess documents, sealed with Belgutai's own personal mark, proposing an alliance. Not just any alliance. A detailed plan to divide the Mongol Empire itself. The documents outlined everything. Belgutai would feed false intelligence to mislead Mongol armies, create fake reports to isolate Genghis Khan, and when the moment came, enemy forces would strike. In return, Belgutai would be crowned as ruler over everything west of Samarkand, a king in his own right. When those papers began circulating through the Mongol command, Belgutai must have known his empire of secrets was collapsing like a house of cards. But even then, he showed why he was still the most dangerous man alive. He sent a single message to Genghis Khan: "Meet me alone or everything burns." He wasn't threatening violence. He was threatening truth. He held the keys to every hidden sin in the empire, the affairs, the assassinations, the falsified victories. And worst of all, there were rumors, written proofs even, that Yochi, Genghis Khan's eldest son and heir, might not be his biological child. If that secret ever surfaced, the Mongol succession would implode. Civil war would follow. The empire itself might die. So the two men met, alone, in a felt tent outside the main camp. No guards, no witnesses. They talked for 6 long hours. When Genghis Khan finally stepped out, his face looked older, like he'd aged a decade in one night. Belgutai emerged moments later, smiling faintly. Whatever deal they made that night broke every Mongol rule of justice. Belgutai was ordered to leave immediately. Exile. He was never to return. In exchange, his vast intelligence network would be absorbed intact, and all his secrets would stay buried. Officially, history would record him as dispatched on a mission. He was given a horse, a few supplies, and 7 days' head start. For a man who'd betrayed Genghis Khan, that was a mercy beyond belief. But mercy, even from the Khan, had limits. Belgutai made it 43 days. He was tracked down near the shores of the Caspian Sea, not by soldiers but by Mongol hunters. The message was clear. This wasn't about justice. It was about honor. The execution told the story. Belgutai was wrapped in a white carpet and trampled beneath horses until he died. In Mongol tradition, that method was reserved for royalty because it kept noble blood from touching the ground. Even in condemning him, Genghis Khan was acknowledging what Belgutai had been: a brother, an equal, and a threat too great to live. What followed was one of the bloodiest purges in Mongol history. Over 3,000 people connected to Belgutai's shadow network were executed. His name was erased from the official chronicles. And yet, his legacy endured. The Mongols never again allowed one man to control all intelligence. They built overlapping spy networks, multiple verification systems, checks and balances that modern intelligence agencies still use today. But without Belgutai's mastery of psychological warfare, the Mongols lost their subtlety. Conquests that once ended through clever manipulation now ended through sheer destruction. Cities that might have surrendered peacefully were wiped out entirely. Historians estimate that Mongol death tolls rose by nearly 40% after Belgutai's fall. In the end, his story stands as a brutal lesson that information, once weaponized, can be deadlier than any sword or arrow. They say Belgutai began as a survivor, a boy who learned that knowledge meant life. But he died as something else, a puppet master who trusted no one and was trusted by none. Modern intelligence experts still refer to it as the Belgutai paradox. When someone knows too much, they become too dangerous to exist, even to their own allies. The boy who once hid under the corpses of horses to stay alive at 7 was crushed under the hooves of them at 30 because he'd learned too much to be allowed to live. And as terrifying as Belgutai's story is, he still wasn't the most ruthless Mongol warrior of them all. If you think this tale was wild, wait until you hear about Subutai, the commoner who became Genghis Khan's greatest general, conquered 32 nations, and never lost a single battle. Compared to him, Belgutai looked like an amateur. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this one. I'll see you in the next story. Cheers.